Hello. Hey, Mr. Subjective. Please let me know if this is working, because I don't know if it's working or not without help. So please let me know if you can hear me. I'm trying a new setup. Hopefully, people will appreciate it. So please let me know if you can hear me. If you can't hear me, we'll have a problem. uh, so. So, yeah, please let me know if you can hear me. If you cannot hear me, or if you can hear me, please let me know. That is your job. If you're in the stream, you got to tell me. If you're early, you got to tell me if you can hear me. So otherwise, we'll have issues. Okay, great. Thank you, Photographic Elements. Awesome. That's good to hear. Um, so I'm doing a new setup because I was asked to by one of the subscribers uh, to have better production value. So I'll try. Fujifilm luckily came out with a application that allows me to plug the XH1 into my computer just through the normal cables. I had not been able to get a capture card, which was necessary. So Canon came out with a thing, and now Fujifilm came out with a thing. So that'd be great if everybody came out with an application to let us do this. The only problem is that I've got to do it through YouTube, which I'm not used to. I'm used to using OBS and doing the broadcasting through there. So I want to use OBS because once I get everything figured out, I'll be able to do some better stuff. So yeah, it has black bars, and I don't know why. So yeah, I don't know why it has those black bars. It might be the way that the Fuji app is working. Um, so I apologize if it looks weird. This is my first time doing it. I tested it in Zoom. I tested it before. I apologize if it looks weird. So can't say it's my fault though. uh, so let's see here. I got a lot of notes for today. It was a very rough week for us in the United States. So I'll talk a very little bit about that. I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but it's very difficult for us right now. Fuji XH1 through AJA UTAP to computer. I don't know what an AJA UTAP is. I'm using just a USB cable from basically how you tether the camera. You essentially are tethering it to the computer, and the application just kind of communicates with different software. The only weird thing is that OBS, which is open broadcasting software, it's an open source like a live streaming or screen recording program that I use for tons of things. I actually use it often with education because I'll have, if a faculty SME is talking about a website or talking about specific things, I kind of, do all that. So no, I did not see the article about a Leica store being looted. That's very unfortunate. Um, I just, I wish that people would not take advantage of these kinds of situations because there's a very poignant thing that's trying to be said and it's being overshadowed by looting, and it's very unfortunate. I don't know. I don't have much to say on it. It sucks. My hometown got set on fire, so I was very sad about that, and it was very difficult. It was a very difficult weekend, and not as difficult as many other people, by the way. The people who are out in the streets protesting, their lives are very difficult, and they're trying to tell us that, and it's very difficult, very hard. Um, yeah, so a lot of stuff to talk about. I was in the middle of writing up my notes. I wasn't sure if I should do a live stream today, but I figured I should. So let's see. I'll just leave that as three major topics to talk about, and kind of get with you guys and have some Q&A and stuff like that if you have anything to talk about, because I think that would be important too. I kind of want you guys to help drive the narrative of these kinds of things, because it helps to know what it is you want to talk about and what kind of questions you have or things that you've seen. That helps out a lot. Yeah, I mean, I would need to have what you're talking about, photographic elements. I don't have that. The thing is that all I was going to do was get the Elgato capture card, because it's basically a dongle. You plug that thing in and you put it, like, you can plug anything through HDMI right into that thing and it will capture it no problem. It works with pretty much everything. I was just going to use the Pocket 4K because I could put a LUT in, and the higher ISO is a lot better on that than the XH1 for video. So because I can't do that, um, I'm stuck with what I have, and I'm not paying $400 for someone to uh, take advantage of the COVID situation and mark up the price on a $130 item to $400 just because it's in low demand, or it's in a low quantity. High demand, low quantity kind of thing. It's like, I'll just wait a few months if I have to. So, yeah, I never thought of doing anything like this because I didn't think the live streams would be something that people really liked. I know it's only maybe up to 15 or 20 people per live stream, but people find value in it, so I don't see a reason why not to make it a little bit better. Okay. Are you talking about photographic elements? Are you talking about from your setup, or are you talking about like the live streams? The live streams before were just through like a standard laptop uh, camera or whatever. So I mean, that's why it kind of looked crappy. But this is with the XH1 Sigma 18 to 35 and using Eterna. So yeah, and I have one light here, and then I have one of these small light with a battery on it, just kind of bouncing off the wall. I mean, it's pretty tough because I have it like this is my desk and the wall's right in front of me, so it's not an easy light setup unless I had something to like kind of push on the wall, but it works. There was some interesting stuff happening this week. I'll start with the bullshitting before I get into a couple other things. So, actually, I'll move this. Yeah, I'm making sure I got my notes all situated. So a couple things. I'll get to the protest thing in a minute, but a couple things. I watched a couple movies this week. I watched Air Force One for the first time. Never seen it. The reason is because I'll be honest, I'm not a huge Harrison Ford fan. I don't think he's that great. Like, I know that a lot of people like Harrison Ford. He's usually not very believable for me. So I don't go out of my way to watch his stuff. Like, I really like Indiana Jones movies because the adventure is awesome. And he kind of like is just, he's kind of there along for the ride kind of thing. I think he's okay in that kind of situation. He's basically Han Solo again, but a little bit different. It's a very similar role for him. Air Force One, he's the president, and some terrorists have taken over the plane, and he's gonna be brave and try to save his family. It really is kind of like one of those movies that to me was very indicative of the time. There's so many 90s things in it that are really, really interesting. I really liked it. I think because I have a lot of nostalgia for the way that those movies are kind of told. you usually have, and I kind of talked about this a bit 2 weeks ago. I'm actually editing the. I'm getting done like uploading all of my live stream stuff from about 2 weeks ago, so it's just in my mind right now. But I talked a little bit about Star Wars and for music, the idea of theme, and that movie Air Force One has that too. Like you can hear the theme and you understand what it is and all that kind of stuff, which is very different from music now, which is a lot of tonal stuff. So it's very different. Like especially if you listen to horror from like the 80s even, and you compare to now, horror from the 80s, you'd have like the Freddy theme, you had the Halloween theme, like you knew what they were and you knew what was happening just like hearing it. But newer stuff that's in horror, it's very much tonal things. You like I couldn't tell you what the theme of like the theme music of the killer in what's that movie Insidious. I couldn't tell you. Maybe the Tiny Tim tiptoe to the window thing, but that wasn't really a theme of it. So I guess that could kind of be it, but it's almost like a parody on it. So it's a little bit different. But anyway, in Air Force One, you have so many like 90s things, very, very simple story, obvious bad guys, obvious good guys. You have the theme music. And what's also very indicative of that time period is the way that movies looked. It doesn't matter what movie you see, like, very, very often you get the same kind of looks out of stuff. And that's what I was actually thinking about while watching it. I was like, a lot of people are actually trying to emulate the look from like movies like Air Force One. That's like a film stock look. And I wonder if people really get that the look often was done by the film stock and by who would be developing the film of the time. So that's kind of why a lot of these movies would look very similar. And I was also thinking about that and going, okay, I'm like 100% sure this is shot on film. And there's some areas where you look at it and you go, wow, this lighting is very harsh. Like I was thinking at the whole time, a lot of times we use soft lighting constantly to try to get soft, transitions into shadows and all this. And in that movie, there's such harsh top-down lighting almost the whole time. And I thought, if you made this today, you could actually do this relatively cheaply. And I wonder if that's how they were able to afford all the actors. Because if you watch that movie, it's like a who's who of character actors. There's a ton of people in that you're like, oh my God, I know who that guy is. I know who that guy is. I know who she is. I know what she was in. And it's so like amazing to see them all. And then I was thinking, like, look how cheap the sets are. Like the set itself was probably expensive, but it was like 1 or 2 sets that they're doing most of the work in. It's just the plane, right? And you can see that they're using like the same sets often. And I was thinking how I'm going to turn this around and put it, relevant to this stream is watch a movie like that. Okay. Like go and watch Air Force One and see how they use very few set pieces that have lighting that's set up for whatever they're going to want to do in those situations. Sorry, that's my dog. Another, obvious examples would be like if you've ever watched Star Trek Next Generation, they do a similar thing where they're using like sets where it's like the same hallway, they just shoot at different angles, and they have to be creative in how they shoot it to make it look like it's a different part of the ship. But even if you're doing low budget stuff and you're trying to shoot like a cool movie, if you have a good set, and you can get it lit in a way where even if the lighting looks practical, like it looks like it's supposed to be there, write your story around that and it could probably work. I thought it worked actually pretty well in Air Force One, which I was not expecting. Usually harsh lighting like that, people kind of wag their finger at, but it was pretty amazing that they were able to do it. And I think it was pretty well received. I don't know, but my wife loves the movie. So anyway, it was good. And then totally a departure from that, I watched Pacific Rim because I needed a movie that was going to get my mind off of things. And Pacific Rim, I freaking love that movie. I don't know about you guys, but I think it's incredible. I love giant robots fighting giant monsters. And it's very fun. I can't think of a lot that I don't like in it. I remember when it came out, I was working in visual effects, and there were people that were complaining that the robots didn't make sense and like they wouldn't work in real life and all these complaints. And I was thinking, like, who cares? Like, look at it. It looks awesome. The Russian robot, dude, that design is incredible. It's incredible what they did with that. I love it. Some friends of mine bought like the little figurines. It's pretty great. And what's also interesting in that, check out the color grading in it. Teal and orange, whole way through, and it looks good. And it was also making me think, like, Guillermo del Toro, I think, is a great director. I think he's a great director. It's hard for me to point at many other directors that I can say that regardless of what they do, I feel like I should watch it and I'll like it. I don't think I've seen anything that he's directed that I necessarily didn't like. I did see something that he produced that I didn't like, which was The Strain. I think The Strain is not very good. I was very disappointed in The Strain. I watched the first maybe, I think, 3 or 4 episodes, because I think in order to really know if you like something, you got to watch a little bit of it. Like a movie, if you don't like it within the first 15 minutes, you're probably going to hate the film. You probably. But in a show, because it's such long format storytelling, because it's such long format storytelling in a show, you got to give it like at least 2 to 3 episodes to really see if you like it. I would have stopped watching The Witcher if I only watched the first episode, because I didn't really understand what was happening. Like, not really. And it was about the third one that was like, oh, I get like how they're telling the story now. So anyways, in The Strain, though, I watched like, it had to be 3 to 5 episodes. I don't remember exactly how many, but I just hated the characters. The characters were just awful people, and I was not interested in watching their story, not because it wasn't shot well, not because the cinematography was bad, not because, the visual effects looked terrible, nothing like that. The problem was just the way that the story was being told, and the characters I just did not like. I thought they sucked. And it's one of those situations where I think that if Guillermo del Toro had the reins, if he was the director of that, he probably would have nailed it. And I think it's not a case of the directors of those episodes being necessarily bad directors. It's just maybe it didn't work for them. Maybe it's not the kind of story that they were able to tell, which is unfortunate. That would be on the producing team to pick the right directors to make sure that they know how to tell the story. So to do more upbeat on that, for shows, if you want to watch something that does everything right, in my opinion, Glow. Gorgeous, was it The Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling on Netflix? That show does everything right. It gets the look right for the period. It gets the acting is on point. The casting is perfect. The directing is perfect. I can't think of anything I don't like in that show. I watched all of it, and it's awesome. Can't think of anything I don't like. And that would be an example of a show that does everything right. And I think that there's like a lot of different directors and stuff that work in that. House of Cards is very similar in that too, where House of Cards worked even with directors that you wouldn't expect. But sometimes people can tell a story and sometimes they can't. And if you're a producer, your job, or if you're running a studio, your job is to find the right people who can tell the story. Just to give an example of what happens when it's wrong is like, some comedians are really, really good at doing comedy. They're really good at it. And then they try to branch out and do something else. Maybe they just don't know how to do that. Maybe they don't know how to act that. And the same thing is true in directing. If you're a director who's really good at doing horror, and then you try to go and do a rom-com, might not work. There was a case, I think it was Mark Webb, who did a rom-com kind of thing. And then they thought that, I guess because his last name was Webb, that he would be appropriate for doing a Spider-Man movie. Don't think it worked out. So, yeah, just interesting stuff. Pacific Rim is what Transformers wanted to be. I agree. I wish that I actually didn't have too much of a problem with the first Transformers. Um, I liked it, the first one. You know, call me an idiot, call me a sucker, or whatever. But I kind of liked the first one. I didn't have much of a problem with it. I thought there was some weird choices, you know, but then there were some funny choices. Like I really liked the Mountain Dew robot. Like I remember that how like I was like, oh my god, they turned like a Mountain Dew machine into a into a Decepticon. Like okay, um, you know, I can't say. And the other thing is, I got to defend Michael Bay a little bit. Only in that doing a movie like that is very hard. Doing a movie like Transformers or doing a movie like Pacific Rim, doing a movie where you have to imagine, like you have to look at the scene and imagine, okay, there's a pole. I remember we worked on a bunch of the Transformer stuff years ago, and we would get shots that would just be like a pole with a robot's face on it, and it would just be the shot of that. And you, as the director, you have to imagine what's going on, and the actors too. Like acting in a movie where you've got to imagine everything happening around you is very, very difficult. So at least I can say that about Michael Bay. You know, I don't know if I could make the Transformers one. You know, I think it was an okay movie, to be honest. I liked it. I enjoyed it. I had fun watching it. The second one I thought was terrible. And then you know, I worked on a few of the other ones and I was like, these suck. But the first one I was okay with. And yeah, I think it's fair to give some criticism to the Transformers movies in a lot of ways, but also to acknowledge how difficult it would be to shoot that stuff. I mean, I remember we got a shot. It was for the third one, whatever it's called. It was the third one where there's like a building. There's like a building that's falling over, and it's the silliest scene. There's characters that are sliding down like the windows on a building. It's total BS, but the way that they shot that, it's like overhead, like, and it's like tiny in the frame. Like if you actually look at the shot before any visual effects or anything, it's like shot in a parking lot, and they just kind of like, you know, have them sliding down the thing, and then you see it on screen, and it looks totally different. It looks like it, you know, even though it's impossible that it would happen that way, it's actually pretty amazing how they were able to do it. Yeah, it was actually pretty awesome to see like where it started and then how it got turned into the movie basically later. And even though visual effects play a large part in making that final, and it kind of like, you know, it's, to me, a lot of times it's visual effects that are telling those stories, which isn't how it should be. As a director, you've really got to have that vision, that foresight to see how it's supposed to look, or at least have a really good VFX soup that you're listening to. Yeah. Glad you didn't see Atlantic Rim. Yeah, I didn't see Atlantic Rim. I saw that it was by Asylum, and I was like, nope. Hey, DJ. Popsicle sticks with robot heads. Yep, that's what they looked like. A lot of the shots with the robots in that, it would just be like they'd shoot it, and then it would seriously be like a paper cutout of a robot head, and then like that's what we had to work with. It was like, okay, I guess that's all we have. The best were large, wide shots with the crew in them, and they didn't know we had to tell the vendor about them to clean plate, crew, and mobile. Yeah, so DJ's talking about some funny things. It's like insider stuff with visual effects. Hollywood directors do not shoot with a lot of them do not shoot with, you know, the mindset of, okay, I need to get like a clean green screen removal, and I need to make sure that my crew is not in the shot, so it's not having it where, you know, somebody is having to guess, you know, what is actually supposed to be in the frame and what's not. I need to make sure that I have, you know, the trackers put right on things. Like sometimes they do it and sometimes they don't. And yeah, I remember in was it Dark of the Moon? I think it's Dark of the Moon, the third one. I think that's what it's called. Where we would have these shots. It was especially there's a fight in a bathroom. It's like a fight in a public restroom, and there are like the feet of crew and light stands everywhere. And it's funny when you're working in visual effects and you're asking somebody to like make a clean plate, for alphas or whatever you're going to be doing. Like you're asking them to make a clean plate, and they go, oh, like okay, and they start doing rotos of like crew, and again you're going, what? Like it's not supposed to be like that. So it's actually funny how many directors in Hollywood just completely ignore all of that stuff. Like I remember we were working on Alice, the second one, and there's a guy, I kid you not, there's a guy who's wearing like a blue suit. He's wearing like a very complex blue suit, and he's against a blue screen. He's against a blue screen, and they have like it's not very well lit. And then they have, as far as a blue screen and all that, to give that separation. And then they had like this metal stuff running the whole length of everything. So you're going, okay, so someone's going to have to remove that. Someone's going to have to go in and like try to separate all that crap out. And it sucks. Like someone is going to have to make a tiny little curve in program, Silhouette or whatever, and have to like remove that that little bit of blue that's in their hair. And in Hollywood, they will take their mouse and they'll zoom all the way in at like 500%, and every little pixel they'll expect to be gone, even when they didn't shoot it to really be done that way. It's really kind of amazing. But yeah, VFX stuff is very difficult, especially when people don't shoot properly for that. I just wish his directing style wasn't so exhausting to watch. Yeah, that's a problem. I mean, it kind of does suck that it's like that, but I think he knows what he's about, and I think he knows what he's good at, and I think he sticks to that because it makes money. I think it's interesting it's really interesting to see like the difference between how different directors talk about things, like filmmaking, like listening to David Lynch talk about why he decided to do the kind of career he has, versus listening to why someone like Michael Bay has the career they have. They're completely different, like processes and thinking on why they do what they do. I think one of my favorite things was listening to David Lynch talk about when he went to talk to George Lucas about possibly shooting Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. And he keeps saying like, I went there like to the ranch and I was getting a headache. And then George was talking about like, Ewoks, and I started to get like an even bigger headache. And he just keeps talking about how he's getting these headaches. It's amazing. If you haven't seen that, watch that, him tell that story. It's very funny. So yeah. Alrighty. Okay. So I'll get into stuff. So I'll first talk about the protests and all that. It's going to be kind of quick, but there's a lot of protests happening in the United States right now. The protests are against brutality that members of the community have experienced, and please understand that on this channel I don't want to do I don't want to get political about everything, but if I don't say anything, then people are going to think I don't care or whatever, but I do care. I just I kind of I want other people to kind of like speak their message. I don't want to get in the way of that. So just to make it clear, like for me personally, I stand with the protesters. I don't stand with looters or anybody who's assaulting anybody. Doesn't matter if it's citizens assaulting someone or if it's a police officer assaulting someone. I don't stand for that. So I just want everyone to be safe. I want people to be heard, and I want us to move forward. So that's my clear stance on it. I don't really want to go over that too much. I worked with some people to cover Politicon some years ago. We talked with the Oakland members and founders of Black Lives Matter. Good people. Please try to understand what's being said. And Black lives do matter. That's my thing. And please try to, if you're on the other side of any debate on this, please just try to understand what they're trying to say. Okay, that's all I got to say about it. I don't want to make a whole thing about it, but that's all I've really got to say. Okay. So on that, I just want to talk about this. So a lot of us that are on here are going to be working in media, or we do work in media. I used to work for the news. And something really important that I want to just try to say is that if you work in media and you're working in news, or you're working in documentary filmmaking and all that stuff, I just want to stress the importance of your integrity and make sure that you're telling the truth. Okay, please, put the truth in front of anything else if you can. Okay, please do that. That's all I'll say on that. Very quick, but trying to be poignant about it. Please understand that integrity is more important than getting, extra $500. Okay. So please have integrity if you work in any of those fields. Okay. High emotion. It's all good, man. I'll post cuts. You're getting into the better part anyway. So at this point, please put down questions into the chat so that later we can talk about them, and we can kind of use those questions to help drive the conversation. Okay. So I guess the first thing I'll talk about is the new setup and give an update. So I asked, let's see, when did I ask it? I think it was over the weekend. I'd actually talked with DJ, who's in here, about monetization, because I have my own feelings about things. And DJ was talking to me about it, and he said, I think that people will be okay, if they have to sit through an ad to know that they're helping to support you, that they'd probably be okay with that. And that knowing that support would actually also benefit them with, higher production value, or, being given more content, that kind of thing, that, people will probably be okay with that. So I did a lot of thinking about it. And the reason why the money thing is a factor is because even though I don't necessarily need the money, when I'm doing stuff like this, or when I'm editing videos, or when I'm creating other content, it's time that I'm taking away from the other things that I do. Like I take care of my garden. I take care of my lawn. I take care of my dog. I cook almost every night. I do dishes. I help out around the house. I mean, these are things that I do. And if I can't do those things because, I'm, creating this kind of content, I need to pay for those things. I need to find some way to get that work done. So that's more of the situation. And then also the equipment that's necessary to increase production value, or to provide some of the tutorials that I want to do and do it right. I need to have some stuff to help pay for that. So, luckily when I moved into, our new house, I have enough room to do a couple of the videos that I want to do now, because I needed some space to shoot in. Now I have that. It just, now I need to get some of the things I need to make sure that I do it the right way. For example, there's a video that I really want to do about how to coil cables right. If I don't show you guys in detail how you do it correctly, you might not understand what I'm trying to say. If I want to make a detailed video about how to set up something, like, how to use the Nucleus Nano, for example, to extend your focus rotation on any lens. In order to show that, I really need to set everything up and light it right so that you can really see what I'm doing and do it the right way. I don't want it to be where it's just like I shoot myself with a cell phone, and I don't want to do it that way. So that all takes time and money to do right. So that's where it would be going. And so anyway, DJ convinced me to put up the request, and I let you guys vote on it, on whether or not I should monetize anything. This is specifically commercials on the channel. There will probably be a Patreon and or a donation thing regardless, but this was specifically about advertisements. And out of 51 votes, 92% said they would be okay with ads on the channel. So we'll be doing that. I left it up to you guys to decide. So it was democratic. Let you guys pick. So we will be doing ads to help fund the channel. Okay, so I hope that everyone's okay with that. Okay, so that's an update on that. Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about, I posted a video. It was a walk that I did before really all the protests and everything had started, and it's I'll provide a link so you guys can see it if you haven't already. I think most of you guys watch whatever I post anyway, but just in case you haven't, one second. I'll post it here. So I don't always specifically say everything that I'm doing with these videos. A lot of these are me going out on a walk or doing something, testing something, which I don't always make 100% clear because I want to see what people's reactions are. I want to see what their reactions are because sometimes if you know, like if I put up there that this is a camera test comparison or that I'm shooting in low light or I'm doing, you know, a number of different things, somebody might say that they see something when they don't. Like it's not, sometimes it's not there. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about with this. The first thing is that the majority of the shots in this are shot at ISO 3200. That's a majority of the shots. Anything that is in the shade, which is probably 80 to 90% of the shots, is done at 3200. The reason I did that is because I wanted to capture the details in the shadows, but I also wanted to stop down the lens to like a f4 in order to really get, you know, what I wanted to see in focus. Like I prefer seeing more stuff like in shots like this in focus. And I kind of was imagining if I was to use this location for a movie, what would be an understandable aperture that I'd most likely be shooting to make sure that, you know, characters were in focus or whatever. So the amazing thing about this is that even without YouTube compression, with a very basic noise reduction settings, it's absolutely clean, completely clean. You cannot see any noise in that footage. And I intentionally left the shadows relatively high compared to what I normally do, specifically to see how the shadows would be treated both on YouTube and in my renders. So there's a couple interesting things about that. First of all, again, the noise reduction settings I used were on temporal noise reduction. You choose better instead of faster, and you use I used a 3 on both the chroma and on the luma, and it was, I think, a 3-frame step. And then for the spatial noise reduction, it was a 2 and a 10 or an 8 or a 10, I don't remember. So those were the settings I used for noise reduction, and you cannot see any noise in the final render. Of course, we're not, you know, going way in on like a pixel to see if there's any dancing noise or whatever. Okay, I'm talking about watching it like a normal human being would watch it. So the thing is that when people talk about noise on cameras and all that kind of stuff, you know, if you shoot with the intention to expose the noise, you know, you're probably going to see it. And especially if you put your eyeball up to the screen and you view it like, you know, no human being will ever view anything on the planet, you'll probably see it. But the fact that I was able to, shooting in the higher gain, 3200, which normally I don't do, you know, usually I use lights. The fact that I could do that without really worrying about noise in my shadows is pretty awesome. So, you know, depending on what you do, obviously, you're going to have better or worse results. If you're, you're exposing your shadows in the basement, you already know that you can't push them up. But if you expose it properly at your native ISOs, you will have clean images. And because, I shot in Blackmagic RAW, but if you're shooting in RAW or any kind of setting that does not have any real denoising going on, you have to expect that you will be doing noise reduction at some point in your pipe. Okay. And if you look at that footage, it's pretty damn sharp, right? And it doesn't matter if it's on a little stick or if it's on a branch or whatever. Usually the limitation of the sharpness is the display more than anything. So I was actually really surprised at a couple of things on that shoot. Yeah, and like what Mr. Subjective is saying, moving bodies of water is always a problem depending on the bit rate. The other thing that I wanted to talk about with this is that even if you have the perfectly shot, perfectly lit, perfectly color graded kind of stuff, the user, the person consuming your product may not see the video or the product you're making the way that it's supposed to actually be. I've said this a number of times on this channel that my HD renders on my local are always better than the 4K renders that are shown through YouTube, because the compression algorithms that are being used to make sure you can stream it are such in that they cause issues with the product. And I know I've watched it enough times because it was really more of a study. I actually did 6 different kinds of renders for YouTube to see if there was any difference in how the compression worked. And there was no notable difference at all. And also depending on the device I was watching it on, and depending on the quality, HD, 720p, 4K, things would look totally different. On my wife's iPad, every time it gets to the water stuff, it looks like complete mush. You can't see any detail whatsoever in HD. If I watch in HD on my desktop, it doesn't look like that. There's something going on with the way that the iPad is rendering the image that's causing some kind of artifacts to appear on my images. I had, and also if I watch it on my phone that's broken, I broke the screen, first time I've ever broken a screen. If I watch it on my phone, the contrast is totally effed. Like anything from just near above the midtones and higher gets blown out for some reason. And I don't really know what to do about that on here, except for the brightness settings. Like if I put it more down where it makes sense, it's fine. If I try to watch this like at higher settings, everything looks blown out. Even if I'm in like a normally lit room. So depending on your device, depending on the display that's showing, and also depending on the browser and depending on a number of different things, the kind of way that your product is going to be displayed. I mean, we may be obsessing about things that don't even matter because we can't even control it. I can't really control the way that an Apple iPad is rendering my images on YouTube. I don't have any control over that. So if I obsess over like, if the product I'm making, I'm expecting Apple users to see, and it's going to be doing that crap anyway, I just can't really shoot and produce that because it's going to look like crap no matter what I do. Like I actually saw a really interesting thing. It was, as I was trying to figure out why this was happening, was it Shutterstock, I think, put a thing out. They were like, oh, here's tips and tricks to make your YouTube videos look better. It's like, oh, shoot shallow depth of field. And I'm thinking, okay, so basically we have to limit how we even shoot anything for the delivery of the for the delivery, and we need to start thinking that way. Like if we're not thinking that way right now, like if we're still assuming that everyone's going to be watching a lot of the products that we do on a television, or especially on a movie theater screen, if we're still thinking, how is my movie going to look on a movie theater screen when that might be going away? And most people are actually going to be watching on this, or on an iPad, or on their desktop, or, streaming. Then we need to start thinking that way. It might be that, and I've been thinking this for a long time, that the equipment that we have right now, and the noise that we get out of cameras that we have now, and the lenses and all that stuff that we have, dude, the problem isn't like that stuff that we have. The problem is probably more in the compression algorithms than anything else. If the image that's being eventually spat out at the end is totally destroying your footage, what are we even worried about? If I upload noisy footage to YouTube, and because it compresses it to hell, all that noise is smoothed out regardless, does it really matter? Might not. It might not matter at all. So, and the other thing that I was doing with that video was I was seeing people on the Blackmagic Design Forum complaining that you couldn't get proper greens. And I was just like, I don't know what they're talking about. Like, it looks fine to me. I don't know what they expect. I was able to get whatever green I wanted. I got it to, where it would be like, correct. And then I said it needs to look a little warmer in a lot of the shots because I didn't like the cooler look. So, yeah. The other thing that I noticed when I was doing this video is there's a bunch of footage that I shot that didn't make the cut because I just didn't like it. But ACES, don't use ACES for the Pocket 4K. All right, I'll explain, and I'll make a video on it because I've been working in ACES to try to understand it. ACES is messed up, okay, for the Pocket 4K and most likely the 6K, and I'll explain. Most of the time, the images are totally fine. Most of the time, you're not going to see like major artifacts or major issues. However, in that sequence, there are two shots that putting it in ACES rendered the image unusable. One of them was the shot with the sun off in the corner. In that shot, there's purple fringing because the Sigma 18 to 35 is not supposed to cover the angle of view that it does when you use the 0.71x speed booster onto the Pocket 4K. Like, the width is actually too long for the image circle or where it's supposed to be projected. So you end up with this like pretty significant purple fringing on the very edge. ACES, no matter what I did, was causing the purple fringing to bleed in the image, meaning that no matter what I did, it would make these dark holes in the footage. And the same thing was occurring with tail lights, because there's one shot where I get cars with the tail lights because I wanted to, I never shoot that, and someone had asked me about those situations. So I was like, okay, well, I figured it out with blue lights at night. But what about red tail lights? If you use ACES, you're going to get artifacts in those red tail lights no matter what you do. Okay? No matter what you do, you will have artifacts. And if you know this, because if the first thing you do in the first node is pull the saturation all the way down to 0, you can see these black spots that are clipped values that you cannot manipulate. They are just like dark holes that someone burns into your footage. Now, you might be saying, well, maybe you just clipped the color gamut when you shot it. Not the case, because that's not the case, because with the, if I use DaVinci YRGB, the normal, non-color managed workflow, I can deal with those dark holes. All I need to do is if I use like a Rec 709 transform node, I just map the values. You can't do that in ACES properly. You can't. Not in my experience. I tried gamut limiters. I tried, a color space transform. I tried a bunch of different things, and none of it really worked. It just kept having those holes. It does suck. 1 second. Parched. It does suck that the Blackmagic film and the Generation 4 color science out of the box, like going fed into the pipeline, clips values, because it does that and you have to deal with it. I would like it if they would, map the values properly to be fed into your pipeline so you don't have to do workarounds. But, you can do it in DaVinci Wire RGB. You can't do it in ACES. It doesn't work. I tried it like a number of different times, and I could not get it to work in DaVinci Wire RGB in ACES. Every time I would put it into the ACES pipeline with the ACES transform, no matter what I did, it would cause the artifacts. Nothing I could do about it. There are several workarounds that you can do to get rid of it and to actually make it where you can't even see it in regular Wire RGB. Couldn't do it in ACES. Very disappointing. So I was actually looking at some really, really good footage that was shot with what was it, the Panasonic? Oh my God, I'm gonna get it wrong. Not the Vericam. Basically, what is it called? I'll answer some questions while I'm trying to look up the name of this camera. So Vericam LT, I think it was. Let me see. No, it wasn't that. It was basically the GH5, but a Super 35 version. I don't remember the name of it. It has a dual native ISO and all that. The reason I was looking at it was because it has Blackmagic Raw. BMD released a Blackmagic Raw for it. And I was like, yeah, the EVA 1. Yeah, thank you. Like when I'm live, my brain doesn't work right. Yeah, it was footage shot with the Panasonic EVA 1, and they shot like a bunch of stuff where you should have been able to see clipped values, and they weren't when I went and worked within the pipeline. It was wonderful, like good, really good footage. And Blackmagic Raw with that works awesome. I don't think it has where you can change the ISO, but again, like if you watch my stuff, like changing the ISO, if it's just changing the exposure, it's not that big a deal. The Vericam from or is it the EVA 1, not the Vericam? The EVA 1 works with ISO in a very similar way, from my understanding, as the Pocket 4K, which means for me, shoot it at native ISO, and then you just change the exposure in post if you want. That's what I would use it for. But anyway, with that, I was not seeing the same kind of problems putting it in ACES. When I put the EVA 1 in ACES, it looked awesome right out of the box, probably because it has an IDT. The VGamut and Vlog has an IDT that works properly with the EVA 1. The Pocket 4K does not. It does not work right. Should not have those kinds of artifacts with a regular transform. But yeah, very bad stuff. So I will not be doing that anymore. I'm just gonna use ACE. Here's what I'm gonna do. Okay, I'm gonna be using ACES for color correction with stuff I get from Getty that I use for my job, because it works really well for that. For my normal work, I am not using ACES because it's very unpredictable as far as whether or not you're going to have artifacts. So that's another thing I learned from shooting that video. Okay. I might have to duck out and get another one of these because I'm very thirsty. I forgot to get a second one. Okay. So, yeah. So I saw a really good video. It was done by Spencer Sakurai. I think I'm saying that name right. And it's called like Full Frame is a Trap, something like that. Good video. Check it out. It's a good video, and he kind of talks about some of the things that people think is great about full frame. again, if you're on this channel, it's large format, okay, and it not being really all it's cracked up to be. You know, I said a couple times I stopped watching Ozark, partly because I think the format decision, along with how the cinematographer was used to shooting, I don't think they adapted for the look, and I really didn't like how it looked. So I'm just going to read my statement that or comment that I gave on that video, just for this, and this is just my opinion. So if you don't agree with me, it's all fine. Okay, if you don't agree with me on the format, fight, whatever, it's all fine. Okay, but I'm just going to tell you my opinion. I said, bringing more of the background into the scene places your characters in the scene. This format full frame used to be called 35 millimeter or 135, or also small format for photography. It was small enough but decent enough for certain photography. Why change it from small format? Full frame is a marketing and advertising thing. It is called full to imply you aren't full without it. Much like how bigger numbers for pixel count is supposed to make you feel inferior for not having as many Ks. 135 should be called LF, or large format, for movies. Large beverages, large t-shirts are just different sizes. Full frame is also just different. Not only is large format not necessary for filmmaking, it actually can be detrimental for people used to seeing and working in standard movie formats such as Super 35. If you want to see an example of how weird it can look, check out Ozark Season 3 and compare it to previous seasons. So that was my comment on that video. And I wanted to read that because, you know, it's not just me that's seeing it, okay? That guy's channel is really good. Spencer Sakurai. I don't know if I'm saying that right. I think I wrote down, I'll copy paste his name in here. Just check out his channel. He has really good stuff, okay? Really good stuff. He tries to achieve, you know, looks, and he shows his experiments, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not. You know, he's a good channel. He has a good channel. And, you know, I think that there's some people starting to come around to it, that the format thing, you know, large format cameras, all that kind of stuff, you know, it's not all sunshine, rainbows, happiness, good times. It's not like that. Everything is different. When you change to a larger format, you have to rethink how you do things. You know, if you're used to a 28 millimeter, you got to figure out how you're going to get that look. If you're used to shooting at certain apertures with certain, you know, formats and certain focal lengths, you really have to change the way you do it. And to be honest, okay, if you don't do that, you're going to have some struggles. I thoroughly believe that the focus on, you know, blowing out the background as much as you can is not a good way to help tell your story. It works for certain shots, okay? But my opinion is that when you do that, when you completely remove characters from a scene, you really do kind of, not only do you diminish the production value of what you're doing, it starts to look like a YouTube video, is what it does. I mean, how many times have you watched YouTube videos of certain individuals where it's just shooting with a 50 millimeter lens at f1.2, and you know, you got the little sparkly bokeh balls in the background? How many times have you seen that? Does it get boring? Does it have any kind of context to a storytelling device in any way? Or is it just a fancy thing that people do? You know? I really think that there's a lot to be said about stopping the lens down, you know, show the environments. If you need to isolate the subject, you can do it with lighting. Lighting is the most effective way, and composition. Lighting and composition are the most effective ways of drawing the attention to what you're trying to do and tell the story. It really is. When you remove characters from environments and you soften it completely, or you make it so soft where they could be anywhere, to me, it kind of makes it where we are not really there with the characters anymore. You get a harder. It's harder to see the spatial relationships between things. You know. Uh, uh, so that's my feeling on it, and it's just interesting that more people are really starting to see the same thing. If you're interested in the larger formats, please keep in mind that you will have to change the way you shoot. You have to, because it will be different. If you're used to doing it one way, you're going to have to, you'll have to get different lenses. You'll have to really think about when you need that very, very shallow depth of field, because it will be easier to achieve on the larger format, but it doesn't mean that you should always do it. So I think those things are very, very important to think about. So we'll take a break and we'll go back through here and see if there's any statements or questions. So moving bodies of water is always a problem depending on the bit rate. It appears okay on your vid. I think I read that before, but yeah, on that I used a constant bit rate. I ended up doing constant bit rate and using the I forgot to mention this, so I'll say it now. With Resolve, they have now NVIDIA encoding. There's you have a choice between the native or NVIDIA. NVIDIA, better results for me. Resolve with the native encoder, it softens grain. So I guess that could be a good thing or a bad thing. If you want it to be, more noise free, you could do that. But what it does also is soften the image. The image is a little bit softer. And if you add film grain to your image, it will actually soften the grain if you use native. If you use NVIDIA, it makes it look like what you're seeing more in the viewer, in the GUI. So, the NVIDIA coder is actually is really good. But anyway, for that, I had tried, I did several different renders. I had variable bitrate versions, constant bitrate versions, H.264, H.265, and DNxHR actually. There was because I was I was reading, and it was supposed to be that DNxHR or ProRes, if you get these larger codecs, that you'll have a better compression that YouTube does for your footage. I could not see that. I did not see that there was any difference between DNxHR or the CBR H.264 encoder. There was no difference that I could see between H.264 and H.265 either. So I think it just depends on what you decide. Now, what I did see was that certain variable bitrate versions were causing more artifacts on water situations than others. So, that was an interesting kind of thing. But yeah, if you haven't checked it out yet with Resolve, the NVIDIA encoder, definitely do your own tests. Don't just take my word for it. Check your own tests. Do whatever codecs that you usually encode to, and check to see if it's better or worse for you. For me, the H.264 NVIDIA encoder was better than the native. Which is funny because I was actually talking to DJ about getting some new graphics cards, and I was talking about possibly getting a Radeon 7, but if I get the Radeon 7, I won't be able to take advantage of the NVIDIA encoder, so it's kind of probably not do that now. Probably end up getting NVIDIA because of that. That's what happens, man. If a company doesn't want to support something that you want, you get stuck. Depends on if you're seeing H.264, H.265 only on Apple. VP9 non-Apple devices, or AV1 in newer versions of Chrome and Firefox, but not on iPhone. Yeah, dude. Once again, Apple sucking, because it looks like trash on the Apple device, but looks fine on everything else. I just see that as Apple sucking again. I don't know what's so pro about that. I don't know what's so pro about them, making it where when somebody else views my footage that it looks like trash compared to watching it on a Windows device, but I guess that's what makes Apple pro. Was it was it like with the original BMPCC where the sun would have a black circle in the middle? Yeah, Paolo, that's talking about the clipping in ACES. It's basically like that. It's not as obvious because it'll be a color clip. So if like if the red in like a stoplight, for example, if you don't touch that color at all, you probably won't see it. But if you do a global saturation change, you'll start to see that red sticking out like a black spot, and it'll be really obvious. So it's especially obvious when you pull the saturation all the way to 0. Paulo says, I wonder how backwards compatibility works with those things, because if by fixing a bug, they could change how colors looked on projects graded in the past. Well, the thing is, Paolo, is that a lot of times this is just data interpolation. If I'm able to get a clean red that is a super saturated red from a traffic light or from a brake lights on a car, if I'm able to get an image that doesn't look like it's clipped, doing one type of process, but I have to do all this workaround, all that's required then is from Resolve, from Blackmagic Design, in Resolve or in whatever. All they need to do is figure out how to interpolate those colors in that gamut properly to a working gamut. If you look at a lot of color spaces, like that big triangle that goes, there's like the visual, like what we can see with our eyes, the colors that our eyeballs can see, that's drawn on those triangle charts. If you see how big like red wide gamut RGB is, it's humongous. And when you're having the Blackmagic Pocket 4K color gamut and the gamma being interpolated into red wide gamut RGB and like linear or something, there shouldn't be any clipping. It just shouldn't be there, because it's like that color gamut is just huge. It's gigantic. Even Rec 2020 is pretty huge, but it doesn't cover everything. Like Rec 2020 does not cover all the colors or the gamma interpolation that the Blackmagic Pocket 4K has, which is why some people have problems with their footage. I was seeing people say, in the forums, they were going, oh, well, in the raw tab, if you go to Rec 2020, or if you use, if you use DaVinci color management and you go to a Rec 2020 timeline color space, that's what you want to grade in. Yeah, you can in some situations, but you'll find that if you shoot at night, again, with these stoplights or with traffic lights, or with, that's the same thing, traffic lights, or with the brake lights, or with neon lighting, you'll see that if you work in a Rec 2020 timeline color space using the Resolve color management, you might actually have clipped values, because that Rec 2020 isn't big enough and it's not being conformed correctly to that color space. Unless, then you have to start working in other ways where like your timeline color space has to be larger. You need red wide gamut RGB, or you need the ACES AP0, which is huge. And even then, like even ACES AP0, if you go from, the Blackmagic Design gamut, the generation 4 into ACES AP0, you can still have clip values. So it's just data interpolation. That's the problem. A lot of people took RAW. This is something good about Red Code. When they shot with their original red, was it the MX1 or whatever, the early cameras, they'd shoot RAW then, and then later, maybe 10 years later or whatever, they would have access to software developments that help their RAW be developed better. It would be sharper. It would have better color management options. It would, take some values that may have appeared clipped before or like looked poor, and then it would just transform it differently. All that's happening is data interpolation. So yes, it should be able to be fixed with projects that were done in the past, assuming that the data is there. If the data is lost, then it's lost. But what I'm seeing is that, it just seems like the Pocket 4K, for example, is just recording this gamut that's just gigantic, and the math is just not working right in some situations. And you end up having to do these workarounds that I don't think we should have to do. Expressive Imagery says, "Hi, Tony. This is Tony too." Oh, hey, man. Good name. With regards to your excellent red IPP2 color space pipeline in Resolve, is it possible to create a LUT that I can apply on P4K so I can show my clients on the monitor? Okay, so there is a subscriber that sent me LUTs that are the red IPP2 mapping, but it's done as a lookup table. You should. I'll talk to them about where they got those because I don't know where they got them. But I assume if it's free, like if it's free to get those LUTs, which it should be from Red, I just can't find them anywhere. It has like everything. It has like the high contrast with the hard, mediums, soft and very soft roll off and all that stuff. It has it all there as a lookup table, which means that you can use a color space transform node, get it into red, wide gamut RGB, and red log 3G10, and then put the LUT on the end. With that, you should be able to do the exact same grading procedure as in doing it with ARRI, like how I show in one of my videos and doing it with ARRI, where you basically transform into ARRI log C and their color space, and then you throw the Rec 709 LUT on the end. It should work the exact same way. So I'll talk to them about that and see where I can get it. So yeah, excuse me. Photographic Elements says a Coen Brothers movie would suck if it was shot at T1.5. Yeah, man, watch Fargo. Watch Fargo. That movie is cinematic as hell, and most of it is like you can see everything. It just looks awesome. I mean, a lot of it I think has to do with just the overall storytelling that's going on. I always go through comment sections because they're always an endless source of information. And there was someone had said a response about that. They said, what was Fury Road? They said Fury Road looks incredibly cinematic, and it looks like they're shooting so many things at like T11. And someone responded and said, well, it's like the lens choices and the grading that makes it look that way or whatever. And I was like, no, it's not. Like, I'm sorry, guys, but the costuming and makeup design for Fury Road is incredible. Joe does not look like Joe if you don't have a good makeup effects guy or gal. I'm not sure who it was, but if you don't have a good makeup effects person working with you to make your actors look like they do, if you don't have those people available to really make it look like a movie, you're not going to. It doesn't matter what lens you use. You could use the most expensive lenses on the planet. If you're making a horror movie and your monster looks like crap because you didn't shell out the money to get who you needed to make it look right, dude, you already messed up. You messed up in the pre-production phase. The lens won't matter at all. You know what makes Fury Road look awesome and cinematic? It seems like, a wide shot of a lone vehicle being chased by an army of tanks and guns and soldiers and stuff. I mean, and you see them closing on them. What makes it cinematic is, seeing the story of a guy who is a foot soldier just doing what he was told, finally thinking for himself and dying for a cause he can believe in. That's what makes it cinematic. Even down to if you look at Furiosa's face, the choice to have her head shaved, the choice to make her face look dirty, the choice to make her have an arm that's been taken off, the choice to make Joe look with those tubes and all that nasty stuff all over him, the choice to make all of his kids these like monstrous looking things. Those are what makes it more cinematic than a lens. A lens doesn't do anything for that. And if you're a cinematographer, especially, let me just try to be honest about this. If you're a cinematographer, You gotta start thinking about filmmaking as more of a global filmmaking thing, okay? Because if you're only thinking about a cinematography and that's all you can see, you're almost like the carpenter who sees the fix to every situation as like you got to put some nails in it, or you got to use this hammer, or that kind of situation. It could be something totally different. It's like, if you have a situation, dealing with a country, and all you talk to was the military personnel. Well, they have their ways of dealing with it, and to them, every situation will call for the way that they understand it and the way that they work. They'll see everything as like one type of solution fix to your problems, when in reality there could be 100 different ways to do it that actually work far better than that. And if you're a cinematographer and you're looking at a movie and you're trying to think what made this look the way that it does, if you're not taking into account the costuming, the makeup effects, the locations, the actors, the way that actors look, their faces. Like, I was talking to my wife about this because I was complaining about Full Metal Alchemist and the live action version, which I think just the minute you see it, it looks wrong. It looks like it was put together by people who didn't know what they were doing, because everything just looks wrong. It's from the costuming and just the choice of people and their faces and their hair. Their hair doesn't even look right. That has nothing to do with the lens. The lens could be the most amazing, expensive lenses on the planet with all these characters and all this stuff, and it could be lit right. Doesn't matter because it doesn't look good, because all of those other things have to be taken into account. So just understand that. Like, I get it if you're used to looking at things like only through the lens and only through like the eyes of a cinematographer. I get that, and we need you to think that way. But if you're going to have more of a bigger discussion about what makes filmmaking or what makes a movie look a certain way, or what makes a movie look more cinematic or tells the story better, you got to look outside your own box. You got to look at everything. You got to have a holistic view of the situation to really understand filmmaking. Okay. Ghostbusters is not just, the most famous and probably the most profitable ghost thing ever done because it was just funny. It also has incredible visual effects. That shot of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, when all you see is his little head and he's like, and he just kind of like looks and then he keeps going. And it's like like you're kind of tracking him through the buildings. That shot is actually copied in a bunch of movies that you probably didn't expect. This guy is copied in Pacific Rim. There's a very similar shot in that. That movie doesn't work if you don't have the visual effects and all those other things to back it up. So you got to look at filmmaking as in a holistic way, not just in your own box. I don't know why I was getting on that. Okay. There's a YouTuber who did a quantitative survey of a series of images, one with a shallow depth of field, the other with higher aperture number. Majority of the participants prefer more of the subject in focus. Usually that's true, especially in filmmaking. If all you've got is like, a sliver of an eyeball in focus, the shot's going to be out of focus most of the time. Usually people like to see more of it. I mean, there's like, for me, it's the acceptable level of depth of field. You want enough. I always go with the head approach. You want the whole head in focus if you can. Because even if you mess up on the focus, you'll at least see enough of the face in focus where it won't make too much of a difference. When I was watching Air Force One, there's several shots of Gary Oldman where they're focused on the back of his head, but because they stop down enough, it's not that distracting. Like, you can still see that he's there, and you'll see this a lot. Like, especially if you watch old movies where you didn't have as many devices to help us that you do now. Where back then you'd have to measure, from where the gate was to the subject and make sure that you got it in focus. And you'd really want to stop down because it was difficult to get it 100% in focus and have sharp focus. You'll see it a lot in those older movies, but when they're stopped down enough, it won't be as distracting as in newer content. It's usually YouTubers that do this, where the focus is kind of going all over the place and it's super shallow depth of field, and they're either in or they're out, and it's distracting. Whereas you stop down a bit, not as annoying. DJ Tutorial says, is there an NVIDIA encoder like option for OpenCL? There's only for Resolve, I'm only seeing either NVIDIA or native. I don't know what those things mean as far as native, but if they had like an OpenCL, I would imagine if it was more like open, that more people could do it, it would probably be better. But I think that they started doing that because Premiere started doing an NVIDIA encoder, and Resolve was like, okay, we'll do one too. I think that's what happened, but I don't know the series of events, but I didn't even notice it until like I updated to the newer Resolve, and then I was like, oh look, this is in there, and I started seeing stuff about it. So, funny thing is that, okay. The funny thing is that Paolo says, the funny thing is that they are part of the alliance making AV1, but they are not supporting it. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Sorry, I'm not sure what that was in reference to. It wouldn't make sense to me if there wasn't anything similar with OpenCL, AMD GPU platform. Well, it might be. Maybe we can petition BMD to have something more open like that. I'd be totally open with that. It would actually really help because those Radeon 7s are great for the price. What I'm seeing, they're awesome. The only problem is that Blackmagic Raw wasn't working well with Radeon 7, and several things. So it's kind of like, if you stick with NVIDIA, which is I guess more popular, you'll have you won't have to spend as much money and have equal success. But if more people make a stink, maybe they'll give us what we want. You can Bruno says you can find LUTs on their website. I downloaded as well. Bruno, can you send me an email with the location of those LUTs? I can make a video on it to help other people, because I tried to find the LUTs on Red and I couldn't find it. So if you could send that to me, please send me the location. That would really help me out, because I looked on Google, couldn't find it. So please send that to me. That would help us out tremendously. If you don't know what my email is, check out the About section on my YouTube channel. Peter says, just watched some Ozark season 3 scenes. The cinematography feels so distant and disconnected. I agree. I agree. It just doesn't have the same feel, does it? It doesn't feel like a movie to me. I mean, I know it's a show, but it just doesn't feel like a movie to me. So yeah, I mean, I guess you're seeing it too. Cheap Ass Reviews says, like the new look, what did you change? So I was asked to increase the production value. There's several things that I've been wanting to do that. It's just expensive. One of them was to get a capture card, which I was looking for the Elgato 4K capture card, because I wanted to use that for like a number of things too, because I could like record myself while I'm doing things on the computer, so that there's more to cut to while I'm working on things. But it was like $400. But Fujifilm came out with an application to use their cameras as a webcam. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in OBS, which I prefer over the regular YouTube camera thing, but it only works on certain things. It doesn't work in OBS yet. So hopefully OBS will give us an update so that it will recognize the Fuji camera. But yeah, so Canon did it, and now Fuji did it too. So cool. Glad you like it. It's a Fujifilm X-H1 with the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. DJ Tutorials, it exists since FFmpeg supports it, or maybe not. I'm watching from my phone. It's really hard to read basically what you're searching for. Focus hardware encoding support in the GPU. Yeah, you guys are talking about getting the GPU or whatever to render out of Resolve for better quality. It's just right now it's only NVIDIA as far as I know. Cheap Ass Reviews, I'm definitely one of those that miss focus. Yeah, dude. It's hard. Like nailing focus is a lot harder than people think. It's a lot harder than people think. I remember I had a conversation with a focus puller, and he had a like impossible situation. And I mean, there's a reason why focus pullers, if you're really good at it, you get paid very, very well in Hollywood, because the amount of money that it costs to reshoot something or retake something because the focus was off is tremendous. If you like your actors, sometimes there's only that one take that they nail it. There's like that one take where your actors nail it. They get on their marks right. They get on their marks. They emote properly. They do everything that they're supposed to do. And if it's out of focus, it's wasted. And that can really demoralize a crew too. If you nail it, like everybody nails it, but the focus was off, sucks. Stopping the lens down definitely minimizes the chances of that happening, because more of the scene is in focus to allow those kinds of mistakes, especially if you're not great at it, which is fine. You don't have to be great at anything, or everything, I should say. You don't have to be great at everything, especially if you're doing everything by yourself. It might be that nailing the focus is like really hard. That might be a case where you need to have autofocus that's reliable. The only ones that are somewhat reliable are the Canon ones, in my experience. The Sonys are getting better, but still not that reliable. You still want to stop down. The more you stop down, the less reliable they are. Also, the autofocus, because of the way that autofocus works. There's a reason why your lens, if you're shooting in stills, opens up to wide open, focuses, and then stops down again. It focuses better when there's more light in there. So, and that's fine. You might be somebody who needs that kind of autofocus over whatever else, and that's all fine. Or you just get someone who can do the job. So, yeah. NVIDIA encoder is also blazing fast even with denoiser on. I actually haven't seen that big of a difference, but I have a good CPU, so maybe that's why. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see too much of a difference with that. It still was encoding about the same speed. Maybe but I haven't done benchmark tests. It might be faster, but I just don't do that. Like, to me, it's like experiencing. It's like, okay, I'll do it. Took about 5 minutes to do that render. Took about 5 or 6 minutes to do that render. It's about the same. That's how I see it. DJ says, just give me a file to run for you since I have 2 R7s. NVIDIA doesn't work on Mac products natively. So like I said, would be weird if there wasn't any equivalent for OpenCL. Yeah. That's another funny thing. Why doesn't Mac allow some of the most popular GPUs? That's kind of weird. That's weird. Yeah, and considering that there's a lot of usually Mac friendliness, maybe that's changed now since they're fighting over ProRes RAW versus Blackmagic RAW with Apple. But yeah, that's interesting. If there was an equivalent for OpenCL, maybe they're working on that. Hopefully they are. I would love that. But yeah, I can send you some stuff. It'll be Blackmagic RAW, and you'll have to put in the grades to make it really work. Emotion VFX says, I have the old Elgato game capture. That's fine at 1080 and just $80 nowadays on eBay. I don't buy much through eBay because I don't trust it. I'm afraid I'm going to get something that's a knockoff through eBay. But I was thinking about that too. I don't think I'll need 4K capture. So maybe 1080 will be perfectly fine, because on these, like streaming, it's usually, I'll bet this is 720p right now. So it probably won't really make much of a difference in reality, like if I'm using it only for this. So you might be right. Like, maybe just get the older one. But doing stuff like this is relatively new to me, so I don't know what all is available. Bella says, I finally found the FFmpeg doc that talks about it, and they support OpenCL only for filters. So if that's really an AMD limitation, they would probably have to come out with a new GPU which supports it. Yeah, probably. I mean, you guys might know more about that stuff than me. Bruno says, just sent the email with the LUTs as well as the link to them. Thank you, Bruno. That's very helpful. That's very helpful. I will be able to do a video on that. So that, because I know some people like more of the LUT workflows versus using color management. And if the LUTs that I've seen for Rec 709 specifically, okay, Rec 709 specifically, the LUTs seem to work just as well as the color management option. The only thing is that they're LUTs, so Red needs to give us like Rec 2020, HDR, like all the other ones too. With color management, you can actually do the output properly to that. So Paolo says, so unlike NVIDIA, AMD doesn't seem to support hardware encoding, only effects. Yeah, weird. DJ is actually already making waves with the community. Not kidding. He was talking with, I think it was an AMD person about some of the stuff that he's doing, because he's actually doing some really good stuff. He really, his render comparisons are very good, and he got some responses from people that are in the industry to talk about the bugs that he's experiencing. So really good stuff. Yeah, AMD Radeon ProRender devs for Blender. Yeah, the ProRender stuff like does some good stuff. It's just with the bugs and things, like you're doing everybody a service, DJ, that's in that field. So thank you. Cheap Ass Review says, really like your nature shots. Ever think about showing your BMPCC 4K walkabout setup, or have you already done that? I haven't done any of those, and the reason I haven't is because I didn't think anybody was interested in that. I could do that. I'm actually using right now the same kind of setup that I used for the Pocket 4K. It's a Benro hi-hat, and actually, give me 1 second. I started, get close to the mic. I started using this, which is, can you see it? Hold on, check this out. I can actually focus. Let me see. Yeah, so this is the Manfrotto N8. It's a Nitrotech thing, tripod head. And it's got this handle. Hold on, let me switch to where I can see. Okay. So this little handle here, this piston, it helps you to counterbalance your camera, which is awesome. Because when I'm using, this is the 18-35 f1.8, when I use the honking ass beast of a lens, the 50-100 f1.8, I can use this thing to balance. I got my Band-Aid finger on. It's disgusting. I can use this thing to balance with the new lens, and you basically just minimize your drag on your tilt. You have your camera here, and you use this thing, and you lean it forward, and you just kind of twist this until you basically have it where it's rock solid on your tilts. So that way, when you do your tilting shots, it will, even if you stop moving, it doesn't sink, it just stops entirely. It actually really, really helps. It's a really easy and effective way of doing counterbalancing, even if you've got really heavy lenses. So I'm very happy with this thing. I had some other tripod heads. I used the Manfrotto F02. Is the F02 or the F04? Let's get me back in focus here. Alrighty. I used the Manfrotto, I think it was either the F04 or the F02, and I was not very happy with it. To be honest, I got rid of it. And then I bought a really cheap tripod and headset that just, it's terrible. It was terrible. That's all I got to say about it. It did not have fluid movement at all, and it only had drag on the tilt and not on the pan, which is ridiculous. So, I've used a ton of different tripod heads. It's just different when you have to buy them yourself. You kind of like start looking at the price more. And, Satchler is great, but not everybody can afford those really expensive things. But the Nitrotech ones, I was really surprised at how good they are. The N8, I think, is really great for, if you're BMPCC 4K or 6K user because it's for lighter weight cameras. The N12 for the heavier setups. So that's really all I use for those kinds of things. I was getting the low angle shots with the hi-hat because I think they just kind of I think when you shoot stuff like nature and all that, you need to shoot it at an angle people aren't familiar with so that they can see more of a way that in a different way. Kind of like when you get the reason why macro is so awesome is because nobody ever really puts their eyeball next to an anthill to look at how it operates. Nobody really, gets a close up of a spider's face to see all the eyes and all that kind of stuff. So by changing, from, where people are seeing at a normal height, if you use a normal tripod, you're going to have, usually around the height people are. If you get that low angle, it kind of has a different look. And also with the hi-hat, I was able to put it onto there are these stone walls that are overlooking the creek, and I could just set it up right there on the wall, and that way I didn't have a wall in the way of my shot. I could tilt all the way down and then kind of go all the way up. So yeah, if you're going to spend money on camera gear, a good tripod head is worth the money, because if you suck at panning, especially panning and tilting like I do, and your hands are shaky when you're doing that kind of stuff because whatever, maybe I drink too much coffee, or I've always had kind of like a nervous personality. So whatever it is, like if I was a surgeon, I would be killing people because I'd be like this, trying to cut. So, with a good tripod head, you can really save yourself some headache and misery. So, yeah. Let's see here. And I appreciate that you said you like the nature stuff. I really do. I appreciate that because, that's the kind of stuff I like to do for fun. Even though there's a purpose that I usually do those kinds of shots like with a purpose in mind. I go, okay, here's what I'm doing. For that one, it was like, I'm going to shoot in these shady areas. I want to see how much of that shadow detail I can get without noise. And like most of that is shot at ISO 3200. And I was able to do that. Like the underside with the water dripping down from the needles, that was all in shade, near the end of the day. So as the sun's coming down, I'm getting, that. And I was shooting at 3200. I think it was at for that shot, I think it might have been f2.8. I think. I don't remember. It's probably in the metadata, but that was a goal of that. And I like doing those. I know for some people they can be boring, but I like doing those. So I appreciate that. For your next vid, how about doing a cooking scene? I thought about that. I actually cut myself cutting up a bunch of meat because we actually use one kind of ground beef for lasagna, and then another type of ground beef for burgers. And I was cutting the wrong way, and I in my head I'm going, okay, I need to cut off this piece of fat. And I was like, I'll just do it this way. In my head, I'm going, I'm going to cut myself. And then I cut myself like an idiot. Like I knew it was going to happen, and then I did it anyway. So don't cut toward yourself. But yeah, I thought about doing cooking because, I'm doing a lot of baking, and I do a lot of cooking. There's a salmon that I make. DJ actually gave me the foundations of it. That you'll get, if you do it my way, it will taste good, and you will never dry out your salmon. It will be perfect every single time if you do it the way that I do it. The trick is with cooking salmon is you don't want it to dry out. There's a number of different ways to do it, but the way that I found to do it every single time, I'll just say it. You take you have your pan, you cut your piece of fish, however big it's going to be, whatever. Set your oven to 350. Okay. Put foil in the pan that you're going to cook it in. Okay. Then you season it. I use salt, pepper, lemon pepper, and basil. Okay. and then you put 2 little lines of butter, and then you top that with lemon slices. Okay, you do like maybe 3 or 4 lemon slices. Okay, then you take the foil, you make a tent, and you close up the sides. Okay, you put that in the oven at 350 for about 30 to 35 minutes, and it will be moist and it will be flavorful and awesome every single time. Okay, if it's not coming out right, it's either because your oven's too cold, which you can either just leave it in longer or you just up it to like 400. Okay, I've lived in a ton of different apartments over the last few years, and every place was different with the oven. It should be 350. If you've got like the oven right, it should be 350 for 35 minutes. Easy to remember. If you need to turn up the heat, just probably think about how much time you want to put it in there before checking. Okay, that'll make it perfect every time. And then the juice that's on the bottom, that juice that comes out on the bottom, you can spoon that onto rice. What I do is I actually break up the fish a little bit and I put more of the juice inside the fish. That's what my wife loves that too. So you can do it however you want, but that's how I do salmon, and it comes out right every single time. And it's really good. The trick with the butter, if you don't put the lemon slices on top of the butter won't melt right. The butter helps keep it like nice and moist, and it's good stuff. So I could do some stuff like that. I mean, I could. It probably won't be on this channel. It'll be a different channel. It'd be like, Tony Day Cooking or something. But yeah. Where was I? All right, here we go. AMD Pro Render devs. Yeah. Depth of field. Yep. That's with this lens. Using the rubber band, but the shakes come through for sure. Yeah, I tried to use the rubber band thing, and the problem with it is that I couldn't like actually control it the way I wanted. Like if somebody's walking and I'm trying to keep up with them, I could never get the feel down of that pulling the rubber band and it stopping. Like it just wouldn't do what I wanted. So I get the theory of it, and I think it could work. It like maybe it's just how I'm doing it is wrong. I don't know. Like I tried it before. I'm not great at it. I've been watching a lot of Glenn and Friends cooking due to shooting on 2 Reds. Why? Why would you need Red cameras to why would you need that? That's funny. 2 Reds. Glenn and Friends cooking. I'll have to look that up. Why would you need Reds? That's interesting. I never. Usually, I see Canons for something like that. Reds are going to be very expensive for doing something like a cooking show. There's cooking shows, dude. You can have like shoot it on a cell phone and it could be successful, and it could be really good. There's some really awesome stuff that is just shot on cell phones, and it looks great for what it is. I mean, the point is to make sure that the recipe is understandable and it works. Really good one for me for cooking shows is actually Good Eats. I really like Good Eats. I like the style of it, even though it's like the old style, like Good Eats from a while ago, where I think it's still in 4:3 and it's in standard definition. All that stuff doesn't matter. Like the little skits that they have. Like I remember one time Alton Brown has to like go get some certain tomato paste, and he has to go find it from like a certain person who's like selling it out of the trunk of their car or whatever. I mean, just stuff like that makes it fun. But yeah, his cheesecake recipe is really good, except for he's got the timing wrong. You need to cook it for like double the length of time he tells you. It's good cheesecake though if you do it right, especially if you add lemon juice and lemon zest. Make it a lemon cheesecake, dude. It's freaking good. Motion VFX says, add a tint to this part of the summary. Your cooking part without showing food is like David Lynch's daily weather forecast. Maybe tinted salmon covered. I will keep that in mind, dude. I will keep that in mind. Chef Tony channel. Yeah, probably. I mean, I could do something like that, but yeah, I mean, I would probably have to do it a little different because my thing is like, I like as far as cooking goes, like I believe you got to do it right. Like for me, there's certain ways that you're supposed to eat certain things, and if you don't do it right, in my opinion, you're not doing it correctly, and then people will complain that it doesn't taste right. Like, if you have a dessert that's supposed to be served with nuts in it because it adds that texture that you need in order for the dessert to be fully complete, and someone says, well, I'm allergic to nuts, then I'd be like, okay, you got to have something crunchy in there. There's got to be an alternative, or you shouldn't probably get that item because you're missing out on some of the features of that food. Yeah, DJ is correct. My baked potato recipe requires a tub of sour cream per potato. Every baked potato should be 2 parts sour cream, 1 part potato. So that's totally true. Like, my baked potatoes are like a mess on my plate. Basically, how I do it, I get like the big baked potato, cut it, and then cut it again, and then cut it horizontally so that there's like 8 pieces, and then each line you put like a little bit of butter. You put a little bit of butter in there. You do salt and pepper. Then you put a line of sour cream, and then you do a line of chives, and then you do a line of cheddar cheese on top of that. I am a potato deviant, and I have no problems with that. Love baked potatoes. It's one of my favorite things to eat. I have to be careful with that, though. Usually it's only on steak night we do that. It's like filet mignon steak. I've said it before. Perfect way to do it. You make sure that it's about, that. You don't want them too thick, or this doesn't work that great, but about that thick. And then you sear it. You want to use a cast iron pan. Put it on like a lower. If you're not used to using cast iron, you make sure you don't burn things. Okay. For me, it's a 2 out of 10 on my gas range. You sear it. Oh, sorry, I forgot. You got to make sure they're room temperature. Salt and pepper on both sides. You can do it liberally because you can't really over season it. Then sear it for about 2 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes aside, depending on how done you want it. Then you turn the heat all the way to low. You put in the pan some butter, like a tablespoon of butter, or even more if you need it. Minced garlic, and make sure you push out the oils so you get all the oils out there and it's all nice and flavorful. And some rosemary, and make sure to break it up. You put it in the pan, and then you spoon the butter sauce over the steaks while it cooks until it's medium rare. So good. So good. You do it that way, you'll have a good steak every time. 2 minutes aside for me, about 2 minutes aside, sears it perfectly. Butter, yeah, dude, butter, fat is the vessel of flavor, man. Makes everything good. You actually can use that butter, that garlic butter sauce, and you get some bread, you put it in the pan. Oh, good. All right. So we're going to end this by talking about something entirely different. Yeah. Imagine if somebody walks in the stream late and finds cooking advice. Yeah, that's part of how it goes. Sometimes these kind of take a turn. But now for something completely different. So there's a particular agitator on YouTube in the photography community that often will make claims that are totally wrong. He's not wrong about everything, but he makes certain claims that are completely wrong. And it kind of bugs me because there's a very significant echo chamber within that person's following. So what they were saying, which is really annoying. And again, they're not wrong about everything. Okay, I would say that not everybody's going to be wrong about everything, but this particular thing he's got wrong. Okay, what they were saying is that older lens designs have higher image fidelity, his words, higher image fidelity than newer lens designs. This is empirically false. There is no way to prove that they're right. Okay, how you know that is because older lens designs have a lot of problems that render images that aren't what your eye sees. Fidelity being faithfulness to the image. Fidelity, the word, the definition has to do with being faithful. your eyes, when the sun's out, say it's, facing you, your eyes don't get glazed over with a wash of glare, unless you have, eyeglasses on with poor AR coatings. Older lens designs have poor coatings. They usually have poorer aligned optics because they didn't have the same kind of precise instruments that we do now. Older designs are generally not as sharp, meaning that they naturally are not as faithful to the image because they cannot physically render the image correctly. So, they've got all these glares. Your eyes, when you're looking out on a scene, you're not seeing significant amounts of chromatic aberration on a tree branch, or whatever. That is not a faithful rendering of an image. Okay? Chromatic aberration, unsharp images, tinting in the wrong way, which makes it look unrealistic, softening, flares, glare, all of those things are not faithful to the image you're looking at. Nobody's eyes see an image the way that older lens designs see real life, which means there's empirically no way that could be faithful to the image. There's no way to prove that older designs are any way better or more, especially more faithful to an image than a modern lens design. You cannot prove that. Now, if your argument was older lenses render an image more beautifully, in your opinion, subjective versus objective, if you were to say subjectively, older designs render people's faces more beautifully because you don't see all of the flaws in their skin, then I would say, yeah. The funny thing is, in this video, he says that. He says, these older designs, like the newer designs, they're so sharp that you can see all of the pores on someone's face and all this. It's like, yeah, it's rendering the image the way that it appears. It's rendering the image the way that it actually looks in real life. And people don't like that. They don't like that it's more faithful to real life. That's the real thing that's going on. The more modern design actually renders more real, true to life images than an older lens design does. And that's what people don't like. That's why, an actress is going to ask you to put a softening filter, because they don't want everyone to see, lines on their face. They don't want that. The reason why, if you shoot an interview of someone, doesn't matter if they're a man or a woman, if they're conscious about their age or their, I have like Edward James Olmos face. I have all kinds of scars on my face from acne. I still have acne. I'm like in my mid-30s and I still have it. Do I want everyone to see all of the images on my face? Would I rather have it where an image was less faithful to the way I look? Yeah, I would like if it was less faithful, not if it was more faithful. So, it just, people need to change the way that they're talking about this stuff, because if you're going to try to make a claim about something being more faithful to an image, I'm sorry, but just because you like the way it looks doesn't mean it's more faithful. People don't like seeing themselves how they really look. Most of the time, they don't really like the way that they look. They don't want to see it. They want to see an artistic rendering that makes them usually look better than they do. The reality is that whatever the lens is seeing, if it's sharp and it's in focus, there's no chromatic aberration, there's no softening, there's no tinting, all of those things. If it's actually capturing the image the way that it really looks in real life, people don't like that. In every film that's done in Hollywood, there is a pass. Not only are there makeup artists, on films going through and making sure that whatever scars or whatever lines or whatever, color redness, like people with rosacea and things like that, makeup artists and stuff, they're going to try to make that not look apparent. And then on top of that, VFX artists that live all around the planet do a pass smoothing out facial features regardless. Happens on just about every television show, and it definitely happens on every film, every single one. Doesn't matter if they're using vintage glass or they're using new glass or whatever. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter, because people don't want to see real life. They don't want to see an actor that has lines on their face if they want to have a fantasy about some woman that they're, if it's a rom-com or whatever, people have their fantasies about what people look like. They want to see someone who's not real, not somebody who is real. So again, the argument that an old lens, it's easy to see it. When you take an older lens and compare it to a modern lens, you take it out in broad daylight and you see how much glare and flaring is on an older design with older AR coatings. It's easily apparent which one has better fidelity, if that's really your argument. If your argument is image fidelity, faithfulness to the image, faithfulness to what you can see with your eyeballs, then there's no way you could say that the older lens is more faithful to it. You couldn't say that, because the details that are rendered with a modern piece of glass, like those things are there. Those are there. Okay, whether you like it or not. An actress or an actor might not like it that they've got crow's feet, but they're there. The lens sees it, the lens sees it. You can see it with your eyeballs. In fact, who is the actress? See, I don't want to say the actress now. I believe I know who it was, but I won't say it because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But there's a very famous actress. She's like, supermodel beautiful in the movies. Okay. One of my instructors when I was in film school, she was, a producer. She worked at the studios, stuff like that. And she said every time that they'd see this actress, she had a full-time makeup crew that had a palette knife, and they would cake on this makeup to fill in her acne scars, because she had all kinds of acne scars on her face and she didn't want anyone to see them. She'd have a full-time crew following her around to do that. Okay. And you want to tell me about image fidelity and whether or not people really care about that? Dude, it's not that. They want the fantasy. They want not real life. They want the, what they see in their head, or more of a creative choice. If you want to make the argument, I like using old Meyer Optic Görlitz lenses because they have this unique rendering. Dude, that's fine. I don't care. If you want to say you use those because they render like images more faithfully, dude, that's not true at all. It's just not true. It's just not true at all. If you want to say, I really like how when I'm shooting and there's like light coming through a window, and the way that this lens kind of like lifts all the shadows and everything, and it has this kind of glow about the image. Dude, I get that. I totally understand that. Is that how it looks like in real life? Have you ever gone to a set and looked at what a set looks like in real life? They don't look anything like what they look like in a movie. They look weird. You'd be like, wow, that's a really bright light coming through that window. It's like blowing everything out. The skin on the woman is like completely blown out. And then you look at it through the lens and you're like, oh, wow. You can actually see like the grade. You can see like how everything is being manipulated to make it look correct. Right? So, I guess that's the big thing about this. Okay. Please do not argue that an older lens design, because it has all these like flaws in it that soften the image and make chromatic aberration, make fringing, make all these other problems, especially like the most obvious thing, again, glare. That is not how it looks like in real life. It doesn't look like that. Okay. A lens that does not have contrast loss when it's out in sunlight is inherently going to be more faithful to what you're seeing with your eyeballs. One without contrast loss in broad daylight will be more faithful to what your eyes see than one that does have that kind of contrast loss. One that renders details correctly where you can see them and it's not softening it will render those details correctly compared to others. You want to make the argument that incorrect is better and that more fancy or fanciful or more fantasy or whatever you want to call it makes it look better, make that argument, okay? I have no problem with those kinds of arguments. And to kind of bring it home on that, I've said this before, and I'm going to keep saying it, those flaws, like softening, you can pretty much do that in post. I can always take a sharp image and soften it. I cannot always take a soft image and sharpen it. It doesn't always work the other way. I can always take an image that is absent of chromatic aberration, absent of fringing, absent of light fall off, vignetting, absent of softening where like the image softens as it comes out to the corners. I can always take one that doesn't have any of those things and make the image have that in post. I can always add those things. I can always add it. I can always add tinting to the shot if I want. I can always do that. I can always reduce contrast in an image, or add it. It's harder to do it the other way around. If the image inherently has a contrast loss and the data was not picked up from the camera in the shadows or wherever, if the data is simply not there because the glare, didn't allow the data to be captured by your camera, I can't just add that information back into the shot. It doesn't work that way. It's a lot easier to remove it than it is to add it. So that's my points on that. So I don't know why this guy keeps saying stuff like that. He needs to just come out and say, I subjectively like the way older lenses look. That's totally fine. No problem with that. So, that's the last thing I had on today's discussion. I'll go through some comments now so that we can kind of wrap up. So if you have any questions or any comments, please get them down so that we can go through that. Let's see. Needs bacon. Potatoes don't, when I have my baked potatoes, I have them with a piece of meat, so I don't need bacon on them. But I totally understand that. When I have it with other things, if I go out and I'm really eating, I'll add bacon to it. But not with my steaks. I got to be careful. Butter everywhere. Yeah, butter's good. This is true except for Daniel Craig. The man is flawless. Yeah, dude. I understand what you're saying. Daniel Craig is he's a handsome man. I'd say that in Idris Elba. Handsome men. Mr. Subjective says the only lens character I accept is bokeh quality. Everything else, flaring, chromatic aberration, purple fringing, vignetting, are defects. Yes. That is the right way to say it, because the bokeh quality, the interesting thing is the bokeh quality is something you can actually measure. You can usually, if you get the data, if you look at how an MTF chart is, you can usually tell how smooth or how rough the bokeh is going to look. The bokeh balls, that's a different thing entirely. That's usually based on the aperture and the focal length and whether or not the real focal length, because sometimes an 85 millimeter isn't a real 85 millimeter. Sometimes they're a little bit shorter or longer. But usually the focal length and the aperture can tell you what the bokeh balls look like. The only thing that, and also whether or not the lens has aspherical elements in it, because there's a new way that they're doing aspherical elements now that kind of remove this, but most lenses with aspherical elements have the onion skin thing, which is really ugly. That's one complaint I do have about modern lens designs. Certain ones that have aspherical elements is that you end up with the onion skin thing. I'll say that this too. There are about modern and older glass, right? There are certain older designs that have lasted a lot longer because they were good designs for back then, but they have updates. Like the Contax Zeiss lenses needed an AR coating update for modern sensors. They needed to have that because the reflections that come back from the sensor are not taken care of with the older Contax lenses. They're not taken care of. So, but they still use these same Contax designs, and, some modern lenses are kind of crappy. I'm not saying that a $50, Yongnuo lens is going to be better than a, $1,500 cinema, not cinema, that'd probably be more than that, but like certain Zeiss lenses or whatever, like, it's not clear cut that it's always going to be better, but it's the designs we're talking about, like modern designs, and usually it's modern lenses in particular, and the way that they're designed. There's way more stuff that we have now that make it to where those things are manufactured better because we have more precise instruments for manufacturing. We do. Back then, it would be like in a factory and it'd be a line, and you'd have people kind of like putting it together. There's a lot of human error in that. Now you have it where there's a lot more instruments to make sure that things are measured right. One of the great things that you can see by Canon is the product variation. They have a very, very low amount of product variation in Canon lenses, the L series specifically. I don't know about the cheaper stuff, but the L series specifically has very low product variation, whereas back in the day, you didn't have that. You'd buy a lens and hope that it was a good copy, And of course, I'm talking about if you were to go one for one, comparing like a Nikon lens to Nikon lenses of old, or Canon to Canon, those are more fair comparisons. If you took like a trash modern lens and tried to compare that to like the best of the best older lenses, probably the modern lens wouldn't do so hot. But we're not talking about that, are we? We're talking about like, something comparable things. A Zeiss Otis. Would I rather have a Zeiss Otis and expect it to render a scene more true to life than, an old Meyer Gorlitz? Hell yeah, I would. Hell yeah, I would. Especially wide open. Older lenses at the wider apertures, there's nothing true about that. Unless you have like something seriously wrong with your eyes and that's how you see the world. Like, okay. I think I know who you're referring to. Yeah, Mr. Subjective, you've talked about them before. You know who I'm talking about. I think his mistake is that he used the term fidelity, which makes his stand on the issue wrong. Yes, empirically. He should have used image quality instead, which is subjective. Yes, image quality for everybody is going to be a different thing. Some things are measurable: sharpness, chromatic aberration, smoothness of the bokeh, those kinds of things. Those are all measurable qualities. Microcontrast too. You can actually measure the microcontrast in an MTF. People don't know that, but you can. People don't like that. They think that it's like a mystical, magical thing that you can only really see in the right situations or whatever. Not really. Not if you have it tested right. You can see whether or not it has microcontrast or not based on the MTF. Microcontrast, small contrast details, right? Like that's what we're talking about. Well, if you have a way of measuring where you're actually measuring the contrast of tiny, tiny little lines right next to each other, what is that? Is that not microcontrast? What would that count as then? What would it count as? So you can't measure that kind of stuff. It's just people think that there's like these magical qualities, or that there's like some kind of, monopoly that a certain brand will have about a look, and it's just not that way. A lot of these qualities are measurable, but whether or not you like it, like whether or not you like having veil and glare in an image baked into the shot, whether or not you like the way that, the Canon 51.2L EF lenses kind of melt into the background or not. I mean, that's all obviously subjective. That's like your artistic preference. What art tool do you want to use? It'd be like using, certain paints or brushes or whatever. Like that's all fine, But if someone was to say, well, this wooden paintbrush will last longer than one that has, some kind of steel as the handle. It's like, not really. Like throw those into, a wood, a fire, and see which one lasts longer. Like, what do you mean? That's the kind of thing that he's saying. It's a silly thing that he's saying. It doesn't work that way. You can't make a claim that, one thing is more faithful to the way that you see things. One lens renders more faithfully, when your eyeballs should be able to tell that. Veiling glare is not real life. Your eyes don't see that. When you look right at the sun, or they're ghosting, like, well, kind of, like if you stare at it, like if you look kind of at the sun, don't look directly at it, but are there like, a bunch of little balls that kind of come? You shouldn't see that. But those older lenses definitely have a ton of ghosting. They have a ton of flaring that you don't see with your naked eye. How is that more faithful to what you're seeing? It's not. That's the answer. It's not. The ones that would have less of that render the image more like what your eyeballs see, would actually be more faithful. Whether or not you like it better. And I saw what you said, Mr. Subjective. Yes, he does hate Sigma lenses for no reason. He doesn't use them. He doesn't know how they shoot. He doesn't know how good they can be or how bad they can be. If you won't even try to use something, then how do you know if it's good or not? I mean, how would you know? How would you know if a Zeiss Otis 55 1.4 was good or not without using it? How would you really even know? You wouldn't know. It'd be impossible for you to know. Sold an Exacta lot this week. Old Biotar, Flectagon, etc. Yeah, better invest in something else like steak and butter. Hey man, that's how I spend my time and money. Like, I don't go out and eat at steak restaurants because I make my stuff. And yeah, like those are actually well sought after lenses. The Flectagon, the Biot, like, I know what you're talking about. People look for those, and I'm glad that I kind of got out of that. Because the one that I was really looking for, just the way that it rendered, I thought was really interesting, was a Cyclop. I would love to have that one because it's so interesting, but I ain't paying hundreds of dollars for it. I was trying to get my friend who lives in Korea to go to one of the shops out there and find it. He couldn't find one there either. But I ain't paying hundreds of dollars for something like that. To me, that's like a little fun thing that you do once in a while. I don't want to get something like that and expect to use it for work. That's for sure. I think the other thing too is that if I don't want to say this the wrong way, but if you're like, on YouTube and you shoot for fun, which is totally fine. Like, I totally see why getting different lenses and trying to see how they work is fun. And like, you can say, hey, I got this, FD 85 1.8. It shoots like this. I thought it was fun. Like, I totally get that, but it's a different thing entirely when you try to make a weird statement about that stuff. If you're saying things that are empirically wrong, you gotta check yourself. Like, your personal opinions are fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but just try to keep the empirical stuff out of it when it's actually subjective things we're talking about. And just remember, he hates Sigma with a passion. Yeah, he does for no reason. The newer Sigma stuff is really like very good value equipment, especially if you work for a living. If doing this, if you do video production for a living, the 18 to 35 f1.8 is like the lens you really should have. Like, you really should have it because it's incredibly useful. The f1.8, very wide f1.8 aperture, for a zoom, that's a very useful focal range for what it's designed for, which is Super 35 and APS-C. Awesome. Hard to replace it. Like, there's not a lens that exists right now that can really replace the 18 to 35 1.8. It's actually very lightweight for what it is too. I mean, it's heavier than other lenses, yeah, but for what it is, it being I'm I don't know why other manufacturers don't make something like another 18 to 35. Like if they made a 15, if someone made like a 15 to 35 or 15 to maybe 40, I think that would be perfect. Like a 15 to 40 f2, dude, that would sell like crazy. I would pick one up because that would be the exact range that I would love to have in one lens. But it's really hard to design it. It's really, really hard to design it. Sigma, like those two lenses, a 50 to 100 and 18 to 35, hard for me to replace those. Really, really difficult for the price you pay. The kind of quality it is really, really hard. And it's really unfortunate that somebody just like hates a company so much. I don't even know why they hate it so much. I don't get it. I mean, every company has its own problems. I mean, I can see it if it was like, maybe it's a situation like me with Mac, where I'm not going to buy a Mac computer regardless of what someone really tells me, because my experience was very, very poor with them. But from what I understand, his experience wasn't that poor. So, if it's that case, then he needs to just come out and say, hey, I don't like this company because of this, not because their lenses suck, because you wouldn't know that if you never use it. It would be impossible for you to know. You can't even if you go on Flickr, like I remember going on Flickr and checking out some shots from the Nikon D810. That's a really good camera. I was thinking about getting one used like a year or so ago. Somebody had flooded the D810 page with these really bad landscape shots. They were awful. I don't know if it was that someone shot them with a cell phone and then put it on the wrong thing. But if you're only going by something like Flickr and the images that you're seeing on there and making an opinion, dude, like you can't do that, because it might be that someone's got the camera and doesn't know what the hell they're doing. If you're shooting with a Nikon D810 and you've got a kit zoom on there and you're shooting clubs and it's all dark and you're going by that, dude, all you know is how that guy or gal shoots clubs at night with a D810 and a kit zoom. That's all you get. Can't really tell anything from that. So the only way to really know is to actually use it. Yep. I hope you got good money for your Biotar and Flectagon, because you could have made a pretty good amount of money on that. Yeah. So that's pretty much what I got for this evening. So again, just to recap on a couple things that I talked about earlier with the channel, because the people that take part of this, you guys are my core, and I care about what you guys have to say very much. There will be ads starting as soon as I get the approval, which is taking some time from YouTube for whatever reason. And I did, if you should have probably seen it on my community page, I put up a vote for whether or not ads would be okay on the channel. So I've got it all set up for me to start adding as soon as I get cleared. But I did make it democratic. I let you guys choose, and an overwhelming majority says that they'd be okay with ads on the channel. So just to recap on it, the ads, the revenue that I'm getting for this kind of stuff, the revenue that I'm getting for this is going to go into the channel. It'll go into either equipment, because like right now I'm using my regular lighting equipment that I use, which means I can't quickly pack it up and then like reset everything up. Having some lighting equipment, having some proper recording stuff for doing this, or doing a number of other things. A couple videos that I do want to do really do require me to set it up properly, and that all takes time that I usually don't have, and I have to find a way to juggle all these different things. So I'll have to have somebody take care of certain things that I do normally by paying them, and that will help me pay them to do it. So that's part of it. So there's that. And again, this was like an overwhelming majority of people. It's 92% to 8%, and 51 votes that said they'd be okay with ads. So, they will start appearing. If you don't like that, I apologize, but, I do need to get a revenue stream for me to continue adding, more content, and to increase the production value and stuff like that. All of that stuff costs money. So that's where the money would be going to. I will probably also, after I figured out all this stuff with YouTube, with ads and all that, figure out how we can get a donation thing going, possibly Patreon once I figure that out. I tried to watch a video on how to do Patreon, and the video was so irritating. Like, I do educational video for a living, okay? This video, like, every time they mentioned Patreon, they did like a loud dinging sound, and it drove me crazy within seconds. Unbelievable. You do not, let me tell you this. If you're trying to teach somebody to do something and you're hitting their ear with a loud pinging sound, don't do that. Okay? Because you'll piss people off and they won't want to watch your content. So, if you're really trying to teach people, keep it direct, keep it simple. Okay? And maybe calm down on your attitude thing where you're trying to be all cool and make it all like, hyped up and exciting. Maybe calm down. Okay. But anyway, so I'll figure out how all that stuff works. Let me see here. Yeah. And yeah, so we'll just do a read of the stuff in the last few minutes and then we'll call it a day. So let's see. A few hundred. Yeah, man. Glad Emotion VFX. I'm glad you're able to make some money on that. Hopefully you made some money back from however much money you spent, because sometimes you don't. Like, I know I didn't. I bought a bunch of Canon FD stuff and I didn't get what I paid for it back. Photographic Element says Canon RF 15 to 35 2.8. I guess is the closest. Yeah, I think that might be one of the closest ones. It's the 2.8 aperture. My opinion is that one of the reasons why people really like having the f1.8 or even an f2, if it's like close enough, for me f2 is really close to that kind of aperture, like a nice bright wide open aperture. It really helps in certain situations, like low light situations, or if you're using a wider lens like 35 to 40 at f2 can help in situations where you don't want to change out the lens and you want to get some shallow depth of field. Most of the time on the 18 to 35, I think right now I'm shooting at f1.8, but a lot of times I stop it down to like 2.8 f4 anyway. But the fact that you have the option of shooting it at that very wide aperture and it's pretty well corrected really, really helps. It makes it a really nice feature to have. 2.8 can sometimes be at the point where you say, well, maybe I need to get a prime for these certain shots or whatever. For me, I know that if I have the 18 to 35 and the 50 to 100, the fact that they both go to 1.8 means that regardless of what I'm shooting, I can get a really shallow depth of field with either lens and not have to worry about carrying around like a 1.4 prime. The 50 to 100 1.8 or this 18 to 35 1.8, depending on the situation, will give me the shallow depth of field that I might want for those situations. Because I do, when I'm using these, a lot of times it's in situations where I might not have access to a whole lot of lights to put in. If you're doing like a lot of corporate video, you're doing B-roll of just like, for labs, for example, you want to kind of blow out some stuff in the lab because not everyone keeps a really good lab tidy. So, the more you can not show that, the better. So, in those kinds of situations, having that wider aperture lets you get, follow the action with having that shallower depth of field at like a 35, where you can follow the action. All that makes it a lot easier. Filmmaking a little bit different. Filmmaking, I'd usually, do a bit more to show more of it, but certain situations you don't want to show that stuff. And then again, like f1.8 all the way across is really, really nice. And maybe there's a 15, like that 15 to 35. I would say for me, ideally, if they can stretch it out, and that's also, I think, it's for like a full frame 135 stills camera. But you know, if they can get that, someone needs to make like 15 to 40 f2. That would be good, you know. And the thing that I should say a T2, because the 18 to 35 and the 50 to 100, the T stop is a T2. Okay, the light transmission is at a 2. Not like some lenses where they're, you know, an f1.8, but they're actually like, you know, a T2.4 or something like that. They're a T2, so they're very bright lenses for being zooms. Okay, so the T stop needs to be at a 2. I should have said that. So that's for me. 15 to 40 T2, that would be a good way to go. The reason is because that 18 can be a little bit short sometimes. So having just a little bit wider than 18 can really help out. Usually it'd be like around like a 16 or a 15 would be really nice. But designing that is very difficult. So I understand why they don't exist. The wider, like the wider end is what's difficult. So even if it was big, I'd still get it. All right, guys. So that's it for this stream. I will be, I have some stuff uploaded. I'm trying to get the monetization thing working, but as soon as that's working, you'll have a whole dump of other live stream stuff cut into segments. And I am working on a couple different videos. I will with, let me just check that I got it there. An upcoming video, if yeah, from Bruno. Yeah, if these LUTs all work, and you know, let me see here. Yeah, the website works. So, you know, yeah. Oh, good. So the IPP2 output presets go from Rec 709 and Rec 2020. So I'm going to do some work on those. And the next video will probably be like the ARRI one, but with the red IPP2 mapping. Hopefully you can use those lookup tables in the same way that you can output a LUT for the ARRI LUT that I showed the same way. Hopefully it'll work. It should. It should. So cool, man. Thank you so much, Bruno, for sending that. That's great. We'll keep this highlight. That'll be the next video that I put together. Okay. So catch you guys later. Have a good week. Be safe. Be safe. Okay. With everything going on. And I will see you later.